Hello, Trailblazer fans, Blazers Edge readers. Welcome to another installment of the Blazers Edge player review here on blazersedge.com. I'm Sam Tung, talking about another one of the starters. We've had an opportunity to talk about both Wesley Matthews as well as Robin Lopez, and today an opportunity to talk about one of the other forwards, Nicolas Batum, a player that really progressed in a lot of different ways, can be one of the more frustrating Trailblazers for a variety of reasons, but did progress in a number of different ways, and we're going to be able to look at some statistics about that here today. I like to do every one of these videos with a little bit of a theme, and today's theme for Nicolas Batum is versatility. This is a player that even last season or the year before this most recent season was a player that really struggled when his offensive game wasn't going, when he wasn't, and not even just his offensive game, when he wasn't scoring the basketball more specifically. However, over the last year, Nick Batum really did a great job of improving the way that he could impact a game, even if he wasn't scoring the basketball. You'll see that reflected here in the statistics. Additionally, a player that even if he wasn't scoring, he never really got lost in the game, and also understood how he can impact the game on both ends of the floor. We always knew that he could be, an impact defender, especially in transition, but really you see some of these places where we're going to look for Nick Batum shows that over this last season, he showed that he can be a very versatile player, and he can also be a guy that when his shot isn't going down, he can find ways to impact the game on a night-to-night basis. Let's take a look at some of these stats that I've been talking about. First, the year-to-year comparison between the 2012-2013 season and the most recent 2013-2014 season for Nicolas Batum, as we do on all of these player reviews. The first statistic I want to look at of the four is his defensive rebounds, a place that maybe you wouldn't necessarily expect him to have a huge bump. However, I should say averaged 4.3 defensive rebounds in his a couple seasons ago. We'll get to last season here in a moment. Also, the 2-point field goal percentage, so not the 3-point field goal percentage, but everything inside that arc, was at 48.1%. So again, defensive rebounds at 4.3 and the 2-point percentage at 48.1%. This is a pretty interesting stat. It's a little deeper than you would think, but there is an estimate on Basketball Reference that talks about what percentage of time did a player play at a specific position. In this case, looking at the percentage of Nick Batum's time at the power forward position. In 2012, he only spent 1% of his time, and this is an estimate. Obviously, it's a little difficult to get at this, but the point is he didn't play big as often as he did in the other direction. Really, his natural 3, and then also played in the double-digit percentages at the 2. But again, 1% estimate at the power forward position in 2012. And finally, the 3-point percentage from 2 years ago for Nick Batum was at 37.2%, and that number pretty high for Nick, even though he only shot 48.1% from 2-point range. So again, the defensive rebounds at 4.3, the 2-point percentage at 48.1, only played 1% of the time as a power forward estimated, and shot 37% from beyond the arc. Let's go to this most recent season now and see some places where he both progressed and regressed here in 2013. First, the defensive rebounds, a big bump up to 6.0 defensive rebounds a game. So right at 6, and that's a number that for the Trailblazers, you knew that he was an aggressive defender, but for him to be aggressively going after defensive rebounds the way he did in this most recent season, that's a big boost for the Trailblazers, being able to get those, this is the #1 rebounding team in the NBA, for them to get those rebounds and immediately run the floor. He was both good at running the floor. We knew how athletic he was, but to get the defensive rebounds bump like he did to start those fast breaks was a big improvement for Nick in 2013. Additionally, look at this jump in the 2-point percentage category, all the way up to almost 57%, 56.6%. That really shows that if you look at the statistics by range, not only was he a better finisher, but he also started to develop a little bit of a mid-range game. So a big boost for the Trailblazers to have those two things here in the most recent season. Another big jump, not necessarily on the stat sheet, but you can start to see how versatile Nick can really be. A jump in the percentage, an estimated time that he spent at the power forward position, 21%. So a huge jump. Spent a fifth of his time on the floor as a power forward compared to the season before when he basically didn't play any power forward. So this is a pretty interesting jump for Nick. Obviously, 2 years ago, you had a more interesting lineup with J.J. Hickson in there, and Nick had to play. It was almost like these guys were positionless at times. It almost seemed like LaMarcus Aldridge was the center more often than not. But still, a player that played up last season in Nick. Again, just an estimate, but you can see that he spent quite a bit more time playing bigger than he did playing smaller. And then finally, that 3-point percentage, a little bit of a drop down to 36.1%, down from the 37%. Something that Nick probably needs to improve if he wants to, continue to get shots. He had a lot of big momentum shots last season, but a little bit of a drop. You'd like to see that closer to 40% if he can. So again, it goes back to the main theme of this whole thing, the fact that Batum is a much more versatile player. You're starting to see him develop a little bit of a mid-range game. And you can see that in that jump in the 2-point percentage, also a better finisher, which is something that was a huge improvement for a guy that, as athletic as he is, can get to the basket almost at will, what seems like at will at times. And then also able to impact the game in a number of other different ways, like getting those defensive rebounds and the versatility, seeing that on the floor with him playing a position up rather than a position down. And that he can play small, especially because of his ability as a ball handler. So that's a big opportunity for the Trailblazers to have a player that can play both the power forward, the small forward, and a little bit of shooting guard or point guard if he needs to. I mean, he is kind of that Scottie Pippen build in the fact that he can play a little bit of a point forward. You'd like to see the 3-point percentage increase closer to 40%. However, that versatility, if he gets that 3-point percentage up to close to 40%, that could be, he's going to really be a guy that can be a force in the NBA. And he's already starting to develop that way, only in his mid-20s, so still a young player. But you see the potential, but you also last year started to see where he was understanding more and more where he can impact a game without necessarily having to score the basketball. Now to the second part of our main piece here, and that is the player comparison at comparable salary levels between Batum and a couple other guys at similar positions. Let's throw Nick Batum up on the board here, as Nick, at a salary level of $11.3 million, averaged 7.5 total rebounds per game. Again, up just about 2 rebounds a game over his season before. Shot 47% from the field, and also had 3.1 defensive win shares. And for those at home that are wondering what the heck that means, it's an estimate of the number of wins contributed by a player due to his defense. That's the official textbook definition, but it's really statistically it's an estimate where guys are all contributing to wins on a year-to-year basis, and the higher the win share total, the more if you were to take those guys out and replace them with an average level player, you're probably going to see that number drop. So that was a big number for Nick to have 3 defensive win shares last season. Let's go to the first player hidden on your screen now at a $10.1 million salary at 5.2 rebounds a game, shot 42% from the field. So a little bit of a drop than what Nick had and only 2 defensive win shares. So obviously not the same defender as Batum. That's one place where, again, we all know how effective he can be. We saw that in that series against San Antonio, the way that he was able to disrupt Tony Parker. Player A, on the other hand, not the same type of defender. Then the next final player here at a salary of $12.9 million, almost a $13 million a year player. I mean, this is, we're talking, once you start getting into these, 8-figure a year salaries, these guys are, all-stars in the past, are current all-stars, or could potentially be all-stars. So these are the types of players that we're talking about right now. This next guy only averaged 4.7 rebounds per game, shot 48%, and also had a defensive win share total of 3.1. So the equivalent of Nick Batum. However, he was making, over $1.5 million more a year. To reveal the players now, the first player hidden on your screen is Danilo Gallinari. And these statistics were actually, because Gallinari missed last season, these statistics were actually from his 2012-2013 campaign. So maybe a little deflated, especially because of the potential role increase that he could have had last season with Denver. However, Gallinari still, I think, for a guy that everyone assumed is a good shooter, only shot 42%. He did shoot a pretty high 3-point percentage, higher than Nick Batum. But the big difference here is, the defensive side of the basketball. Both of these players can play big. I mean, some people might even argue that Gallinari is more of a power forward in today's NBA game anyways. So to have that difference there, you could really see that Gallinari, not the defender that Nick Batum is, and actually really doesn't shoot all that great of a percentage, and doesn't rebound the ball near the way that Batum does. If you think of Gallinari, you think of him as a shooter, and that's kind of what we thought of Nick Batum before. But now you're starting to see that all-around game develop for Batum. Still not quite there for Gallinari just yet. And the third and final player hidden on your screen is Andre Iguodala, who made the All-Star team a couple years ago, was a big free agent signing for the Golden State Warriors this most recent season. However, he was really kind of a letdown. He was obviously a great defensive player. We saw that in the way that he handled his time at in the Olympics on the U.S. national team. And this is a player that was supposed to be a huge, really kind of the guy that was supposed to get Golden State over the hump. And you didn't quite see that last season, even though he did. He is a great defender. He had 3 defensive win shares this year. At one point in his career, he was averaging 4.5, which is excellent. But he did at least shoot the ball pretty well. And it certainly, almost identical to what Nick Batum shot. So between these 3 players, really, you're starting to see again that there are players like Andre Iguodala that can affect the game on both the offensive and defensive end, even though he really didn't affect it all that much last season. And then you also have guys like Gallinari that can be kind of heat check guys. But when you start to think about the versatility, Gallinari does have a little bit of that on the offensive end and being able to play up a position. Andre Iguodala has that same kind of ability to play either up or down on the defensive side of the ball. However, Nick Batum is a player that can really do both. He can play some more defensive against smaller guys like he did against Tony Parker. He can also do that against bigger guys, as you've seen with him playing a little more power forward. And then on the other hand, you have the fact that he can handle the ball and he can play a little bit of that point forward. I think Iguodala can do some of that. He didn't get as much of an opportunity to do that last year, but Nick, with the ball in his hands, especially with his length, really showing that his versatility was a really good value for the Trailblazers, or at least a fair value. I think that there was some concern when he first signed this contract, this $11-12 million a year contract, that he wouldn't live up to that. But you can see in these statistics, at the current market value, he is a properly valued player, especially at his age and the type of return that the Trailblazers could get. And now that he's understanding how he can affect the game without scoring, that's going to be a huge deal for the Trailblazers. And that's going to do it for me here in reviewing Nick Batum from last season. Obviously a critical component to the Trailblazers moving forward, and a guy that if he can increase that three-point percentage a little bit, if he can continue to develop his game outside of scoring the basketball and really understand how he can affect a game in that way, which is not always the easiest thing to do. But if he can figure that out, the Trailblazers will have a huge boost from Batum moving forward. That's going to do it for me here on the player review. We will have these player reviews coming at you throughout the summer. We're most, I think we're actually over halfway through the reviews thus far for this summer. So continue to stay with us here at blazersedge.com with continuing coverage throughout the summer as well as these player reviews, and we will talk to you all very soon.